All right, so those were the headlines we're tracking. But now putting the spotlight on the big interview we have today on the show with Lightspeed India's MD Anuj Bhargava. Lightspeed, remember, invests in both early and growth stage companies. They began making investments in India in 2007 through their global fund. And since then, in fact, it has launched its dedicated fund for India and Southeast Asia in 2015 with a corpus of $135 million. The firm then went on to launch two more funds for the region, one in 2020 worth $275 million and the latest and the largest of them all in 2022 worth $500 million. So the big question is, what's making the firm bullish on the India market, and where does the company see pockets of opportunity? Joining us to discuss that further is of course, Lightspeed India's MD Anuj Bhargava. Anuj, thank you very much for taking the time out and speaking to us. I want to first ask you your view on new age stocks that are really hotting up. We've seen Ola Electric, Zomato, PB Fintech, all of these have been seeing upgrades and stock price jumps. Now, do you see that momentum in these companies listing on the Dalal Street? Will that momentum sustain, and why?
That's great, Sumita. That's a great question. I think you're absolutely right in noticing that there's a huge amount of interest from public investors in India on new age stocks. You can see the successful listings that have happened recently, and the appetite investors are showing for names that should be listing over the next 12-18 months. I think you're also right in pointing out that the existing names that have traded for a while have actually traded very well on the back of increased profitability and great execution. I think that the public markets have really shaped the thinking for new age companies to think in a more balanced manner between both growth and profitability. As new age names, strike that balance and continue to grow at healthy rates, as well as are profitable and try and match the expectations that public investors have. We see that appetite continue. I think there is a lot of demand for these companies currently in the market today, driven both by a scarcity value of not having enough names, as well as strong fundamentals that some of these category creators and category leaders bring, and we expect that to continue over the next sort of 18-24 months, simply because we have visibility on the pipeline of companies that VC and PE-backed names that are going to IPO are bringing to the market.
All right, so very interesting, Anuj, when you say that there is going to be that momentum building up at least for the next few months, more than 12 months, going all the way up to 20 to 24 months. But when you say that there's momentum building up in the consumer tech space, QC and AI even, which are the other sectors that are really, are you bullish on? And with startup IPOs, are you really looking forward to? Because, many in these spaces, like I mentioned, are looking at hitting the D street.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. Look, I mean, I think, we at Lightspeed, as you know, we've been investing in India for the better part of 2 decades now. And, we have over $2 billion invested in the country across a portfolio of about 100 names that is very evenly spread across sectors. So if I take you back to the first wave of, Indian tech listings, it was very driven by consumer names. If you look at the current listings today, we're seeing more B2B names, including a lot of commerce names that are gearing up. And we think, Sumita, that the next wave, obviously will continue to come from consumer and B2B, but also software and enterprise names that, start in India but build for the world and have a much stronger international, elements of the whole sort of China plus one thematic we're extremely excited about. We have both enterprise and commerce names that, cater to that theme. And, we're very excited to see how Indian investors, Indian public market investors receive those companies.
Right, Anuj. Very interesting that you really speak about the software side of things so as far as software story is concerned. And now that is being taken forward by AI, and which is where India has a natural advantage. And of course, we'll come to that in just a bit. But speaking of Lightspeed's investments in India, you've invested over $2 billion across past several years that you've been around in the country. In fact, your latest fund was to the tune of $500 million. Give us a status of the deployment of that $500 million fund and how much of that has been deployed for India vis-a-vis the other Southeast Asian markets.
Yeah. So, our first fund, our first India and Southeast Asia dedicated fund, so that was raised in 2015. That was $135 million. We, as you correctly said, have come a long way since then. Our current fund, which is our fourth fund, is $500 million raised in the second half of 2022. And I'd like to say that we're sort of perhaps, close to half of that, if not slightly more deployed. We've, I think from memory, written about, 18 new checks in the last sort of 12 months and 12 follow-on checks into our companies. So, we continue to be very excited and very actively deploying in India. Even though we run India and Southeast Asia as a region together, I'd say a bulk of that, investment has gotten into India.
You say that the bulk of your latest fund continues to get deployed in India, and India is the market that you seem to be more interested in. Will it be correct to then say that we are in a funding spring of sorts after a very long winter? And how do you see capital allocation shaping up, and where do you see volumes picking up?
Great question again. Look, I think, funding winter is obviously a very overused and wide term. So I think that the reality is that, for good companies, there always was and is capital available. I think there is a lot of capital, both domestic and international, that is waiting for various geopolitical reasons, fundamental reasons, to be deployed, in the country. We see that trend, expected to continue across sectors, and especially new age sectors. Let me give you an interesting stat. Technology, if you remove sort of IT services for a second, but just new age technology, still accounts for just over 1%, of the overall index in India versus, anything between 25 and 30% in the US. And obviously with new IPOs that are happening this year and expected to happen over the next 2 years, that percentage is only bound to increase, and even a nominal increase in that index share for tech will lead to anything up to $500 billion of value creation, and I see that coming across sectors.
Right, Anuj, and now let's talk about the AI opportunity. Of course, you were referring to it earlier during our interaction. Now, when you speak about the AI stack, there is chips, there is data centers, and of course, hardware. Now, globally, you've invested in France's Mistral AI and San Francisco's Anthropic AI. In India, you're also invested in some of these companies in AI, that is Yellow AI and Sarvam AI. But where within that spectrum, where within that stack is Lightspeed looking at further opportunities, and how deep will your investments go so far as AI is concerned?
Yeah, it's a good observation. So I think, look, if I take a step back, I think in the last sort of 18 months, Lightspeed really established itself as a leading name in AI investments across the world. I think, if I remember correctly, 75 or 80% of our dollars deployed last year, in the US, were in AI names. And as you correctly pointed out, we've invested across the stack from, LLMs to infrastructure and to applications. And look, we continue to look for opportunities across all of these three verticals, even in India. As you observed, we have an investment into Sarvam, and we're very excited about that. And then, look, I think, the way we look at AI especially in India, is not just sort of organic, opportunities, but also how, they're benefiting our existing portfolio. And, we're extremely sort of, excited to say that I think a large chunk of our portfolio is actually using and benefiting from AI. I mean, there's, a very exciting long-form audio content company, called Pocket FM, that we sort of backed, last year or doubled down on here, that's tremendously benefiting from AI. So we're seeing the benefits all across in existing and new names. Question, we're looking for opportunities across the stack.
All right, so across the stack is where you're looking at opportunities, and definitely AI is shaping industries and businesses like never before. Will be interesting to see how much can India contribute to this growing domain, and that leads to my next question. And let me ask you, what is the view of global investors on India's AI muscle, and how are they looking at this opportunity within the India market?
So I think, global investors are obviously looking at India to provide that sort of, further diversification, if you like, from whatever opportunities that they're seeing in the US. I mean, you also have to appreciate that, some of the valuations for, AI companies in the US have raced, up very quickly. It's also such a rapidly changing sort of environment that something that, may have been attractive, say 6 months ago, might not, be as attractive today. So it's a very rapidly changing environment. And I think a lot of investors, Sumita, if I'm to be honest, at least the growth investors, are still wrapping their heads around, where is it that they want to sort of deploy dollars in size, even in the US. So you see a lot of the activity that's currently happening, is from sort of early stage funds. And in India, I think, investors are obviously looking, for opportunities that are probably priced, closer to, I'd say, sort of fundamentals, if you like, and not, as some of the recent deals in the US have been done. So I think, the talent in India, the engineering talent, the entrepreneurial talent in India, is expected of global investors to obviously, start the next wave of companies.
All right, so let me now shift our focus to the fintech sector, which is where your investments also lie. And this sector has been seeing regulatory action, perhaps to increase transparency and also compliance, given the boom that we've seen in the sector, also tier 2 and 3 towns involved, and it has also connected the last mile. So how much of these regulations that have come in have really changed the pace of growth of the sector? We've been speaking to several experts over this, and they say that they've not really changed. They've not really seen much change as far as this fintech sector is concerned. But what's your view on that?
I think, I don't really look at the sort of involvement from the RBI as a clampdown. So with that, I'd like to say that I think the RBI is actually a very sort of involved regulator. And, in a country like ours where sort of fintech is, very advanced, and I think it's at sort of globally comparable, levels with the best technology that there exists. You need, the regulator to be very hands-on, and I think that's what the RBI is. But having said that, look, I always maintain that good companies are always on the right side of regulation. We have a big fintech portfolio that has sort of over the last sort of few years been very focused on ensuring that they regularly engage with the RBI, and if there's any sort of doubt, they try and sort of tackle it proactively. So overall, I think RBI's involvement is a good thing. We haven't seen that to impact, any sort of enthusiasm in the sector. Of course, look, it's one that has, existed for a very long time. So there's a lot of, existing fintech companies already, and innovation, to stand out is going to be that much harder. Having said that, I think this year, in various sort of parts of fintech. We've probably written, 2 or 3 new checks in India, and I think a similar amount in Southeast Asia. So we remain excited about the sector despite, what people may view as an increased regulatory oversight. We don't see that as a negative at all.
All right, Anuj, so you remain bullish as far as the fintech sector is concerned. But let me ask you one final question before we let you go. And this is pertaining to, this kind of shift, geopolitical shift that's happening globally, a realignment of sorts. In fact, Western economies also are slowing down, including that of China's, and which is what many investors say is leading to the rebalancing of capital as well. And the assumption is that India seems to be gaining as far as, this global realignment is concerned. But let me ask you, is this optimism as far as India is concerned limited to this global realignment? What are your partners in your global headquarters saying about India?
Look, I think it's very well established now, Sumita, that India is, I'd like to say, a rare sort of bright spot, despite all the global geopolitical sort of situations playing out as an investment destination. I mean, if I take a step back, I think the Indian markets are the only markets that have delivered, I think, probably 8 or 9 consecutive years of positive returns. It's delivered higher returns, than the US. I think, India has benefited not only because, there have been questions around China, but also because on a standalone basis, the growth fundamentals have been exceptionally strong. The government has been very stable and supportive. The macro, indicators, whether it's inflation or interest rates, have been, relatively stable. And then if you couple all of that with, the talent that's sort of, emerging, in the country and give it the right sort of capital support, you're bound to see world-class companies being created out of India. And I think, that's how our global colleagues, but, I spend a lot of my time speaking to global investors, look at India as a place where they want to increase their exposure, deploy more dollars, and they'd like to see more companies coming out of India that are not just disrupting the Indian market, but are also world-class companies, that can eventually compete with the best names in the US or elsewhere in the world.
All right. On that note, thank you very much, Anuj, once again for taking the time out and joining us right here on ET. Now, of course, all eyes on India, it being seen as a bright spot in the global economy. But it is really incumbent upon us on how we really capitalize on this opportunity that has presented itself. On that note, thank you very much, Anuj, for joining us once again.